In this video, I want to talk to you about one of my absolute favorite techniques during the springtime, and that is fishing a spinnerbait. A spinnerbait is not a secret lure by any means. This is an old school bait that has really kind of had a resurgence over the last couple of years. And it just seems like when you get on a good spinnerbait bite, which can happen a lot during the spring, during the pre-spawn time that we're kind of getting into, you can catch some of the biggest bass in your lake. It's also just a really fun bite. When fish hit a spinnerbait, I mean, usually it's like a whoomp bite, and they just, I mean, I have caught a lot of big ones this time of the year with a spinnerbait, and today I'm going to tell you just a few tips that hopefully can help you to catch some in the bodies of water that you fish. Now, quickly before we get into the video, this one is brought to you by my apparel company, Finn Fishing. Right now, for just the rest of March, just a few more days here, 2024, if you buy one of my USA Made Sun shirts, you can get a hat at 50% off. So there's no limit to that as well. If you want to buy 2 shirts, you can get 2 hats for 50% off. So you can save a lot of money and you can really help support this channel. All you got to do is add the shirt you like to cart, add the hat that you like to cart. It will automatically discount at checkout. I will leave a link down below in the description. All right, let's talk about springtime spinnerbait fishing. Now, before we get into a couple of tips, a couple of things that I really like to look for when it comes to springtime spinnerbaits, I want to go over the equipment when it comes to fishing a spinnerbait because I think that this is important. And specifically, I also want to go over the lure. Now, there is a number of really, really good spinnerbaits out there on the market. A number of good spinnerbaits. I like War Eagle spinnerbaits. I've used Booyah spinnerbaits, but the one that I have really kind of grown fond of over the last, I don't know, probably year or so is the Berkley, I don't even know what this thing is called. Let me pull it up. The Berkley Power Blade. That's what it's called. And I've got a couple of these and I want to show you guys kind of a couple of reasons why I like this. Now, one of the reasons I like this spinnerbait is, one, this color right here. You don't see that on a whole lot of spinnerbaits, kind of that red blade and red skirt. That thing, I cannot wait. There's a lake that I'm getting ready to fish in a couple of days. I cannot wait to put this thing to use. I think it can catch a lot of big fish. But kind of my typical spinnerbait this year kind of looks like these ones over here. I like the kind of the white and chartreuse, or just white or chartreuse. I don't really think the skirt color matters a lot of times, but a lot of times these are the type of blades that I'm going to go with. Usually I'm going to have either a single Colorado on a big spinnerbait. This is what I like to use a lot when I am slow rolling a spinnerbait. If I am slow rolling a spinnerbait down kind of a like a creek channel swing bank, which we'll talk about here in just a minute, I really like these bigger single Colorado blade spinnerbaits like these. Now, the most important thing about this is you want to go with a little bit heavier spinnerbait. This is a 3/4 ounce spinnerbait here, which is a little bit heavier than a lot of spinnerbaits I typically use. I like to use a lot of 3/8. I like to use a lot of 1/2 ounce. So 3/4 is a little bit bigger, but you kind of want a bigger head on your bait to accommodate for the drag that single Colorado does. That single Colorado, if you have too light of a weight, it will kick that head up and it just looks weird. You'll even get that spinnerbait that is twisting through the water. So that's why you want to go with a little bit heavier head. That's also why I like to slow roll these baits, because if you fish them too fast, sometimes it will kick that bait up. Now, the big thing I like to put on all my spinnerbaits is a trailer of some sort, just like this. And this is the one that I use a lot. This is just your typical Zoom Fat Albert. To me, this is one of the best spinnerbait trailers ever. It's very simple. It's just a grub style. You can put a lot of different spinnerbait trailers on there. But like I've said in so many videos, I do not like to fish trailer hooks on my spinnerbait. And that's actually one of the reasons why I really like the Berkley Power Blade, because if you look at this bait, I mean, look at how far the hook is from the head of the bait. It's probably almost, I don't know, twice as far as your typical spinnerbait. They really made that spinnerbait hook sit a lot further back than most spinnerbaits out there on the market. And I was actually listening to Edwin Evers talk about this, where he was afraid that this bait would get hung up too much because of how far they brought it back. But he actually tested this bait a lot, rolling it over logs, and this bait is still extremely weedless. And that's one of the reasons that I like this spinnerbait so much. The other reason that I like it is because of the spinnerbait blades themselves. You know, I'm not sponsored by Berkley, guys, but Berkley actually has a different gauge spinnerbait blade on here. They're actually a little bit thinner than some of your other blades out there on the market. And the thing about having a thinner blade is it rotates a lot quicker, especially when you are slow rolling that bait, which I like to do a lot in cold water. So that's why I like this blade so much, because it will rotate better at a slower pace. Now, anytime I'm fishing a spinnerbait, I like to have it rigged up on 20-pound line. I almost fish a spinnerbait exclusively on 20-pound fluorocarbon line. A lot of times I'm fishing this bait around four big fish, whether that's even a 4 or 5 pounder. And a lot of times I'm fishing it around a lot of cover, rocks, docks, wood. That's why I like 20-pound line. You know, for me, when it comes to the rod of choice, I really like a rod that is somewhere kind of in that like 6'10" to 7'2" range. And this is actually the perfect rod that I have found over probably the last year that I've started to use a lot with my spinnerbaits. And it's actually a rod that was designed for buzzbaits. It's the Cobb Series Buzz Burner rod made for buzzbaits, but it's a perfect spinnerbait rod. It's 7 foot 1 inch. It's really, to me, the perfect bend. You want a rod that just has a little bit of tip. This is more of a fast action rod, maybe more like a mod fast. It's labeled as a fast, but it's kind of more like a mod fast. It's got a good tip on it where you can really place a bait, but it's also got some backbone to drive that hook in. And then I'm usually gonna go with not a very high speed reel. You don't wanna use an 8-to-1 gear ratio, especially if you're fishing this in the spring. You know, 7.1 is probably the fastest you wanna go with. That's what I have on this particular one. This is an Art Gravity 5 reel. You could even go lower than that. Go with like a 6.4-to-1 gear ratio reel. Because again, one of the biggest things that I like to do when it comes to spinnerbait fishing in the spring is slow roll that bait. Now I want to talk quickly about a couple of tips, things that I like to look for when it comes to spinnerbait fishing. And the first thing is I like to look for a little bit of color in my water. I'm not saying that you can't put a spinnerbait in clear water and catch bass, but what I do think is that you're going to catch bass a little bit better on other lures in clear water. You know, a jerk bait might be a little bit better. Even a swim bait like a mag draft might be a little bit better. But when you kind of get into some more stained, even really muddy water, a spinnerbait will excel. It has a lot of vibration and the fish can track it down from a distance. Now, the thing that's important to know about fishing a spinnerbait in muddy water is that the muddier the water, typically the tighter the fish are going to be to the cover that you are fishing, whether that's rock bottom, docks, or a lot of wood. I love to fish a spinnerbait around wood cover, and they're going to be right on that wood. So it is very important when you're fishing a spinnerbait during the spring to hit that bait right up against the cover. Put it right into the cover, right up next to the cover. Something I like to do a lot is actually pitch a spinnerbait kind of like I would a jig. I will get right up in the cover, maybe a lay down that I'm fishing or maybe a dock. I'm gonna pitch it, I'm gonna hold it just like I would a jig. I'm gonna pitch that bait out there and then I'm gonna put my rod down and reel it back. I like to make really short, accurate pitches around cover because again, if you're targeting kind of muddier water, those fish are gonna be really close to that cover, very close to that cover. So that's a big thing. I will go specifically, I will look at apps on my phone like the Omnia app to try to find off-color sections of that lake that are a little bit higher in temperatures, and that's where I'm going to go. Now again, we're talking about pre-spawn for the most part, springtime, because really the water temperatures that you're looking for are somewhere between about 48 and about 62, 63. That's where the spinnerbait really excels. If you get much colder than that, you know, you can definitely catch fish, but you're not going to get near the number of bites. Typically the ones that you get are bigger. And then once you kind of get above that 62, 63 degree mark, those fish really start setting up to spawn and they will really get off a lot of moving lures during that time of the year. Now, the one last thing that I want to talk to you about is kind of the banks that I look for when it comes to spinnerbait fishing. And a lot of times these are going to be lead-in banks. If I think that the fish are going to move into a particular area to spawn, I like to find banks or areas that have a little bit deeper water close to those areas. So if you're talking about a typical reservoir that has different creek arms, you're gonna have a creek channel that winds through that creek arm. And those last couple of bends of that creek arm before it gets to that flat, typically in the back, those are those high percentage areas. Those are those areas where I'm gonna pick up that spinnerbait, cast it to the bank, work it at a 45-degree angle, and slow roll it down there on the bottom. Those are staging areas where bass are going to show up. The other place that I really like to throw spinnerbaits this time of year are secondary points of some sort. So if I'm in a creek arm of some sort, you have secondary points. These are all the points that you have inside of a creek arm. And if you can find some sort of cover on that particular point, that is going to be a really good staging spot. If you have a stump that's sitting in 7-8 foot of water on that point, bam. If you have a little bit of grass, that's another great piece of cover. Maybe it's just a rock pile, something you can cast that bait out, let it sink, and slow roll it across the bottom. I'm telling you, there are a million ways to catch bass during the pre-spawn. This is one of the best ways to catch big ones, to catch really big ones. So if you guys enjoyed this video, I am going to do a lot more on this channel. You can watch them right here. Also, don't forget to check out this link for fin fishing, and I will see you guys tomorrow.